Well, one of the key issues many scientists have at the moment is that of climate change, or more specifically, those who say climate change does not exist despite evidence to the contrary. And we are seeing the effects of climate change right here in Africa at the moment. Well, let's get right into that now. And I'm joined live in our Nairobi studios by Dr. Richard Munang. He's the Regional Climate Change Coordinator at the United Nations Environment Programme. Dr. Munang, thank you for joining us here. Africa is witnessing the effects of climate change at the moment. We are seeing, droughts and continuous rains and so forth. How important should we consider things like the March for Science, especially in the face of climate denialism?
Very important. Thanks, Beatrice, for having me in studio. The March for Science is quite very important because that is to bring climate change to the fore through advocacy. But more importantly, what needs to be done is that the March for Science is a short-term solution, but putting climate change within the vision of national development, like ensuring that this is mainstream into school curriculum at both primary, tertiary, secondary, and even at university level, will make it get into the mainstream of national, regional, even global development, which is quite very important.
That is very important, but Africa is worst affected by climate change, and yet, as you mentioned there, the voices are not still being heard. Why do you think that the voices from Africa are not being heard when it comes to climate change issues, or are they?
Actually, Africa is a leader when it comes to not only climate advocacy, but action. The Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention, which resulted to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, Africa was actually the country, the region, the continent that contributed to what was called then the intended national determined contributions, and these are plans showing exactly how climate objective could be achieved. After the Conference of Parties called COP21, where this Paris Climate Change Agreement was fostered by the international community, ratification kicked in, and as we speak today, 33 African countries have actually ratified out of 143 countries globally. So within the African continent, out of the 54 countries, it means 60% have actually ratified. It means climate change in the African continent is being seen more as a socio-economic opportunity to be able to address the chronic aspect of poverty, food insecurity, and contribute to macroeconomic growth. So Africa is actually taking the leadership and seizing this window of opportunity to do things differently. Africa
is taking the leadership, and you're talking about the action that Africa has taken prior to today. But on the ground, though, when it comes to national government or regional level, at the regional level, what is Africa doing?
Well, a lot. Still, within the framework of the agreement before the Paris Climate Change Conference that resulted to that agreement, the UN Environment produced a report called the Africa Adaptation Gap Report, which shows that adaptation is a necessity because the world is almost moving towards hitting 2 degrees. And that will be catastrophic because Africa will see crop reduction up to about 40%. And in a continent where 240 million people are going to bed hungry every day, and about 50% of kids below 5 years are dying as a result of undernutrition. And with a changing climate, putting almost 50% of the continent at the verge of undernutrition, that is not only sending a signal that Africa has to do things differently, but at a ground level with these national determined contributions, as I indicated, where Africa has put forward, there is a lot that is happening across the continent. But what is the problem is that these pockets of success stories are not being brought to the fore. And if you look at what the Sustainable Development Goals set out to do is to leave no one behind. So inclusive partnerships, bringing every skill together and ensuring that the actions that are happening can be cross-hybridized. So lessons learned, for example, in the Sahel, can be applicable in semi-arid areas like in northern Kenya and other parts across the continent. And this is done within a framework called the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation for Food Security, where the UN Environment is championing across the continent.
Right, Dr. Richard Munang, we'll leave it there for the moment, but thank you very much for your insights on Africa's efforts there. And of course, these matches for science are not just about the notion of scientific discovery. In Africa, scientific research on climate change and raising awareness about its impact on the world is very critical.